right, golfers, let's talk about that release pattern, okay? So I think there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to the release pattern about how much we should close the club face with our hands and arms through the ball, how much we should get the club face closed in advance and then have it be more passive. You know, not every golfer needs the same release pattern. That's one of those things that I think we need to understand on a deeper level. I will say this right off the bat. Every single high-level player that we've ever tested has some amount of forearm rotation through the golf ball to help them close the club face. Meaning you'll never see a situation where the forearms, for example, you can kind of see my tattoos here, stay straight and the arm never turns over the whole time. Never, okay? That does not exist. What you'll see a lot is when coaches are talking about trying to slow down the release pattern, they're effectively talking about the forearm rotation and the severity of it. So in my experience, the higher handicap players, the golfers who typically struggle with too much loft at impact, too much slice, don't compress the ball or hit it very far, they'll usually have too little forearm rotation, meaning a lot of times they have a club face that gets open, they have a lot of rotation of the upper body to try to close the club face up, but if you actually look at their forearms, there's very little movement going on. So it's almost like they take a club face that's open and they hold on for a long, long time. A lot of the movement comes from the upper body in an effort to close it, more often than not, obviously, over the top. And the forearm rotation is way too passive. The club face never closes, and then obviously the ball goes off the planet. The better players, those who are much lower handicaps, and in my experience, a lot of the tour players that I've seen and dealt with, they have oftentimes too much forearm rotation, which this usually means, you know, whether the club face is open or closed coming down, there's a lot of manipulation of the hands at the bottom to square it up, right? They've developed a good skill with their hands in closing the club face, but obviously under pressure in tournaments, a lot of timing involved. If the body doesn't move very well, you'll see a lot of manipulation of the hands through impact. And these tour players, these better players, they'll often miss a lot of pull draws, or sometimes the club can get stuck behind them and they can't save it enough, even though they have a lot of forearm rotation. It could be like a push fade. But a lot of big left misses for a right-handed player for those better players. So really what we are trying to do, no matter who we're working with, we're always trying to find this happy medium that works for the player. Meaning a lot of those better players, you'll see them down my feed or other coaches' feeds, we're often trying to improve the way the body moves through impact to slow down the manipulation of the forearms at the bottom, meaning they have too much of this movement. We're trying to slow it down and make that a little bit more passive. We're not eliminating it forever. If I take these forearms and I never rotate them at all, my club face is never going to close, right? It's going to require me to almost have the club face excessively shut if I never rotate my forearms to keep that club face square. That just doesn't exist. So we're not trying to remove it altogether. We are simply trying to slow down the severity of it with those better players. And that comes with the body moving better, which organically is going to slow down those forearms. When it comes to your higher handicappers, those who struggle with a power slice, oftentimes they have way too little forearm rotation. Meaning in some cases, I'm not going to say all of them, but in some cases, it is very acceptable to train a player how to close the club face with a little bit more forearm rotation. Because at some point, you can only get the club face so close, and if the club face is in a decent position here, okay, coming down, you can see this here slightly toe down, but I never rotate my forearms at all, it doesn't matter how good my club face looks here, I'm going to just miss it way off to the right. That ball started nowhere near my intended line, obviously. And so there comes a point where you're dealing with a golfer who is either a very big beginner or somebody who just doesn't have a ton of skill. It's okay to train the hands to have a little bit more forearm rotation, especially early on, to get them to close the club face. Just be aware that there's going to come a point where as the player gets better, if they start having too much curve to the left for a righty, that at some point you're going to need to teach the body to move better to then once again slow them down. But at that point, that golfer will already have the skill set with their hands in how the forearms are moving through the ball where it's okay to slow them down. But you have to understand that there is a natural progression there. The beginners that have the club faces wide open and no forearm rotation, it's a death sentence. So it's okay to train the hands to close the club face. I wouldn't suggest it for everybody. Of course, at some point, if the club face is wide open coming down, don't just teach them to roll the forearms over aggressively, you can start by getting the club face more closed first. But if even getting the club face in a stronger position is not enough because the forearms are too slow, then it is totally acceptable and sometimes necessary to train a little bit of forearm rotation through impact in order to get that club face matched up. So I just wanted to let people know it's not one of those things where everybody needs to have no forearm rotation, where everybody needs to have a ton of it. There is a natural progression you'll experience with players of all skill levels there.